This is a CNBC original.
5 million guns sold.
They shot more accurately than any other factory action gun I've ever known.
An American icon.
With accuracy like that, why would you go hunting with anything else?
But this icon is riddled with questions.
Shot that lady in the head, she died in her sister's arms.
How does it happen?
A gun should not fire without the trigger being pulled.
What makes a gun just go off?
Go ahead.
And how far will a company go to protect its signature product? The Insider.
I know the Remington way. You just don't tell nobody nothing.
The inventor, now 98 years old.
Was this a company that would put profit ahead of safety and ahead of human lives?
I think it was stupidity.
A tragedy, a father, and his 10-year search for the truth.
And the public can review the documents for the first time ever.
And the company that holds all the power.
Nobody can force them to make a recall. It's really up to them, right?
Remington polices himself.
This is Remington Under Fire, a CNBC investigation. Millions of Americans cherish their guns, and they cherish their right to own them. They also expect that, like any product, their guns are designed and built to be safe. I'm Scott Cohn. For the next hour, we will tell you the story of a legendary gun, the Remington 700, known around the world for its accuracy and smooth trigger. But there's something else about the 700. At least 24 deaths and more than 100 serious injuries, all linked to an alleged design flaw, and accusations that for decades a venerable American company covered up what it knew. Our investigation begins in Montana. Rising outside Bozeman, Montana, the Gravelly Mountains were an annual fall destination for Rich and Barbara Barber and their 2 children.
Our vacation was going hunting together every year as a family. And that was not about the hunting necessarily, as it was no phones, no distractions, and it was me and my family going out and spending time together.
In October 2000, their son Gus was 9, daughter Shanda was 12.
We were getting along great. The weather was nice. We were in t-shirts, and we had walkie-talkies to radio back to Mom and Dad if we saw anything. We weren't supposed to shoot anything unless they were with us.
Heads up, I'm gonna pick it up.
Okay.
It was the best day I'd ever had in my whole life, up to a point.
Barbara, raised on a Montana ranch, had been hunting since she was a girl. She knew how to be safe, and she knew her gun, a Remington 700. As the day wound down, it was time to pack up.
I handed the rifle to Barbara. Both children were sitting double on a horse right here at the back of the horse trailer in plain view of her.
Right.
I was behind her. She turned towards the trailer to unload the gun.
Unloading a bolt-action rifle involves raising the bolt and pulling it back to remove the bullets from the gun. But older models of the Remington 700 were designed so that before you can raise the bolt, you first must disengage the safety, the switch that's supposed to keep the gun from firing accidentally. At this point, with a round still in the rifle, it's important to keep your finger far from the trigger and the gun pointed in a safe direction. Barbara says that's exactly what she did, but when she clicked off the safety, something unimaginable happened.
And with an open hand, she pushed the safety off to deactivate the bolt lock. The gun discharged.
Little Gus Barber, who'd been behind his mother, sitting on the horse with Shanda, was nowhere to be found.
And she was screaming, "Where's Gus? Where's Gus?"
At the worst possible moment, Gus had slid off the horse and gone around the trailer to get his sweatshirt.
And here's where the bullet exited here. We found him laying right here, wadded up in a little ball. Gus was only this thick. It went in through his left hand,
Right.
entered here, and the bullet exited 4 inches higher on the opposite side.
Did you find him first?
I found him first.
The gun is designed to bring down a 300-pound animal from 250 yards. Gus weighed 90 pounds, shot at close range.
Barbara looked at him and she just said, Rich, I had an open hand. My finger was nowhere near the trigger.
The family jumped into a pickup truck, laid Gus across their laps, and raced toward the closest hospital, 45 miles away. Gus Barber died October 23, 2000, at the age of 9.
And for many months, I would dream about that moment when they pronounced him dead and Gus was looking at me. And the look on his face is, "Dad, how could this happen?" It's every parent's greatest fear.
Even before his son was buried, Rich Barber became convinced Gus's death was no freak accident, and it certainly wasn't isolated.
These people started approaching me saying this happened to us. Exact same thing, gun went off when we released the safety.
2 days after the accident, a sheriff's deputy sent Rich this article from Businessweek about a Texas oil field supervisor named Glenn Collins, who blew his foot off with a Remington 700 after a day of boar hunting in December 1989.
Before you started hearing from those people in those early days after Gus died, did you have any doubts about Barb's story?
No, none. The evidence more than suggests what she said happened.
Nobody ever heals from something like this, do they?
No, and I think it's harder if you were holding the gun.
10 years after her son's death, Barbara Barber still can't bring herself to talk about it. She is certain that her finger was not on the trigger when the gun fired, but Shanda says that doesn't ease her mother's pain.
Every time a gun gets brought up, every time hunting gets brought up, the accident gets brought up, Gus gets brought up, the only thing she falls back on is, "I killed my baby." She didn't do it. The gun did it. Come on, buddy.
Rich Barber has devoted his life to discovering the truth about Gus's death. Barber would learn that the trail of deaths and serious injuries involving the Remingtons stretches across the country.
I went to the funeral home and looked Gus right square in the eye and I said, "Son, it ends here and now." I promised him I would never be bought off and I would never quit until I've effected change.
We set out to find out more about the Remington 700.
Oh, Remingtons are great guns. Absolutely, and that's one of the more popular ones that we sell.
Our 10-month investigation has taken us from Florida to Alaska. We found the complaints number in the thousands and more than 75 lawsuits, all alleging the same thing that happened to Barbara Barber in 2000, the gun going off without pulling the trigger. Jay Rambo says it happened to him and his dad in 2009 on a hunting trip in Alaska.
Just heard him shut the bolt on the gun. As soon as I heard that click, the gun fired.
The gunshot from his father's Remington 700 shattered Jay's left hand. The x-ray shows the shrapnel still inside. Jay says in the first year following the accident, his medical bills hit $300,000. In Texas, Douglas Jordan was hunting with Donna, his wife of 38 years, when his Remington went off, striking her in the abdomen. She died when he left to get help. They sued Remington and the company settled. In another case, Kathy Anderson was at the kitchen table while two people in the next room were handling a Remington 700. They told police the gun went off, but at no time was the trigger pulled.
Shot that lady in the head. She died in her sister's arms.
Attorney Robert Chaffin represented the Anderson family in its suit against Remington. The company settled, but Chaffin can't discuss the terms. That, he says, is typical.
Every case is settled with a confidentiality agreement which prevents you from talking about it.
Remington has consistently stated that the deaths and injuries involving its bolt-action 700 series rifles have been the result of poor maintenance or unsafe handling, and has prevailed in some court cases by arguing that inexperienced users are in denial that they pulled the trigger. Except it's not just inexperienced users who say it's happening. Police snipers in Portland, Maine say after they had trouble with their 700s going off inadvertently and got no satisfaction from Remington, they decided to document the problem on videotape obtained by CNBC.
No fire. Okay, didn't fire. Go ahead.
The gun goes off when the officer touches the bolt. His finger is not on the trigger.
All right.
These agents of the U.S. Border Patrol videotaped their 700s going off when they switched the safety to the off position without touching the trigger. Veteran sniper instructor Bob Cecil in Washington State says he's seen it happen so often on the range that he and his colleagues have given the condition a name.
We call it a Remington moment. We simply announced we had a Remington moment here. Instructors acknowledged it, nodded their head, and we went about our business. It is that routine.
The police SWAT team in Kissimmee, Florida got rid of its 700s after one went off during a drug raid. As this police animation shows, the bullet tore through the house, endangering everyone on the scene.
Friendly fire with 300, friendly fire.
The U.S. military has used Remington 700s for years. In fact, the Army recently awarded Remington a new $28 million contract. But we found that the military has also had problems with Remingtons. After we filed multiple requests under the Freedom of Information Act, the Marine Corps sent us reports from the Elite Sniper Training School at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina in 2003. Some rifles were going off 2 or more times every 20 rounds, according to one report, a safety concern for the school. Expert shooters are reluctant to talk about inadvertent firings, which are often seen as a sign of inexperience. And because Remington has never acknowledged a problem and kept legal settlements confidential, millions of users are unaware of the possible dangers. But now, the full story of the Remington 700 is emerging, with the help of a father pursuing a single goal.
I wanted to know the truth for myself because I've never been good at taking anybody's word for anything. And I felt if anybody on earth was entitled to that truth, it was me.
Coming up, inside an American icon, a deadly weapon dissected. And under fire, Remington responds. Even if you've never picked up a gun, chances are you've had an encounter with a Remington 700. In movies like Absolute Power, TV shows like CSI, and video games like Grand Theft Auto. In real life, nearly 4 out of every 10 bolt-action rifles sold are Remingtons, according to the company, worth hundreds of millions in sales in the 6 decades since Remington developed the 700 series. But this American icon has come under fire.
Is there any credible argument that this mechanism is safe?
No, there really isn't.
Jack Belk is a gunsmith, a former cop, and a recognized authority on firearms. He's been hired as an expert witness in several lawsuits against Remington.
It's a safety issue, right?
It's a safety issue that I feel has the potential to really hurt gun owners.
The story of the 700 starts here, Ilion, New York, the birthplace of the Remington Arms Company and the home of the Remington 700. The company was founded in 1816. In 1933, the giant chemical company DuPont bought a controlling interest to complement its gunpowder business, just in time for World War II. But with the end of the war, Remington needed a new strategy, new customers to replace the military. So, on the very day the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb, the memo went out in Ilion. Our ultimate welfare and that of the company depends on our commercial sporting arms business.
It seems to me that after World War II, the entire business model changed.
Now, the memo said, our first and primary job will be to get new gun designs into production as fast as we're able to get the job done. Among those who got the memo, a young Remington engineer named Mike Walker.
Mike Walker is one of my personal heroes. He's one of the early pioneers that pioneered a lot of the accuracy methods and machinery and mechanisms that we use today.
Walker developed the Remington 721, the first of the 700 series. It was an affordable gun that fired as smoothly as a custom model. The secret? A tiny piece of metal called a trigger connector, which, according to Remington's patent, creates a clean, crisp trigger pull. The easier it is to squeeze the trigger, the more accurate a gun is. And according to the patent, this gun is designed to fire on barely perceptible movement of the trigger. Rich Barber, in his decade-long journey to understand what killed his 9-year-old son Gus, has studied that trigger inside and out.
This trigger was designed to be very short and crisp, but the main feature of the trigger connector is that a refined shooter wouldn't feel the trigger slap on his finger.
But experts hired to testify against the company have stated that if anything causes that tiny trigger connector to become misaligned, rust, grime, or other debris, or even a small jolt, the trigger can lose contact with the rest of the firing mechanism, and then there's nothing to keep the gun from just going off.
No fire.
Yep. Without touching the trigger. And Jack Belk says that is the very heart of the problem.
This is what I testify to. A gun should not fire without the trigger being pulled, and that means pulled and held back.
Remington knew that too, so engineers developed a test seen in this drawing to determine if guns returned by customers could indeed be made to fire without a trigger pull. It involved using a screwdriver to dislodge that tiny trigger connector, then switching off the safety to see if that fires the gun. Company documents show the screwdriver test in use at Remington as early as 1979. That same year, a Remington analysis estimated 20,000 guns in the hands of customers, could be tricked into firing. But Remington knew about the problems long before 1979. In fact, one of the first to identify an issue with the rifle was the man who invented it, Mike Walker.
This trigger was a mistake, and he realized that. By 1947, he realized that the first 200 guns that were in a test market were failing, and he designed a fix for it.
Walker warns in this memo, December 3, 1946, about a theoretical unsafe condition involving the safety. Another engineer calls the situation very dangerous, noting that it is possible to fire the gun by pushing the safety to the off position. In August of 1948, Mike Walker proposed his fix, seen in this drawing, a blocking mechanism that would keep the trigger from moving while the safety is on. This document from 1948 lays out the added cost. It came to just 5.5 cents a gun. A seemingly small amount, but for Remington it loomed large. The project was already well over budget, but the company would decide against making the fix.
They identified a dangerous condition, and they still went ahead with production.
But the issue would not go away. Among the millions of pages of documents uncovered by Rich Barber are decades' worth of customer complaint letters, which Remington was forced to turn over in lawsuits.
These are just the people who wrote to Remington regarding inadvertent discharges with their firearms. And then as we progress through the years, we start to see an increase. You'll notice they're getting thicker.
The complaints stack up in the 1970s after Remington recalls a similar rifle, the 600, over inadvertent discharges. But the company decides not to recall the more popular 700.
And then look.
And then the floodgates
boom.
open.
Yeah, the floodgates open.
It's 1994. Remington is hit with a huge jury verdict in the case of Glenn Collins, the Texas oil field supervisor who lost his foot to a 700. The trial included a shocking twist, according to Collins' attorney, Robert Chaffin.
Remington had an expert on the stand. The rifle, it didn't have a bullet in it, but the rifle actually fired. Malfunctioned on the witness stand, and the judge stood up and said, "The rifle has fired. Let the record reflect that the rifle has fired on the witness stand."
The jury awarded Glenn Collins $17 million, serious money for Remington, whose rich corporate parent, DuPont, had sold the company the year before. So, 2 weeks after the verdict, a Remington executive drafted this proposal, obtained by CNBC, for what it called a trigger replacement campaign, calling back more than 3 million rifles produced since 1960, even listing publications used to advertise previous recalls. But by 1994, the fix was no longer 5.5 cents a gun. Now, a recall would cost $22.7 million. The recall, or callback, quietly died. We wanted to talk to Remington, For months, we asked company officials to respond to the many questions raised by their customers' complaints and by the company's own internal documents. We also wanted to talk to DuPont, which controlled Remington for much of the 700 series history. But DuPont referred us to Remington, and Remington declined to make any of its executives available to speak with us. Finally, 5 months after our initial request for an interview, the company sent us this one-page statement insisting there's no problem at all. The Model 700, including its trigger mechanism, has been free of any defect since it was first produced, the statement says. And despite any careless reporting to the contrary, the gun's use by millions of Americans has proven it to be a safe, trusted, and reliable rifle. Indeed, it's not hard to find gun owners who swear by the 700.
I've just shot them for so long. I've never had any major issues with them. It always worked well. They shot more accurately than any other factory action gun I've ever known.
Bob White is a champion shooter, instructor, and gunsmith who's shot Remingtons for nearly 50 years.
I'm a big fan of Remingtons. You can probably tell.
And Remington notes it's not just civilians who are loyal to the 700. Remington calls the 700 the firearm of choice for elite shooters from America's military and law enforcement communities. That despite the incidents we uncovered among professional snipers.
No fire. Yep.
In its statement, Remington insists neither its own experts nor plaintiffs' experts has ever been able to duplicate such an event on guns which had been properly maintained and which had not been altered after sale. But we found documents from the 1970s showing the company could duplicate and verified the problem in multiple guns.
The amazing thing is there hasn't been more people killed because of the amount of accidental discharges that happen with this gun.
Remington has made some changes. In 1982, it did away with the feature that required the user to switch off the safety before unloading the gun. But it kept the change quiet for 20 years. Until Barbara Barber switched off the safety on her pre-1982 rifle and Gus was killed. The Barbers sued and the company settled, but the agreement stopped short of a recall. Instead, Remington notified customers that for a fee, $20, it would modify the old rifle so the safety would not have to be switched off to unload the gun. But that's not the only cause of inadvertent discharge. The fundamental design of the 700, including the trigger connector, stayed the same, and the complaints persisted. So in 2007, Remington introduced a whole new trigger system called the Exmark Pro. The trigger connector at the heart of so many complaints is gone, and the safety blocks the entire firing mechanism. And what do we know about the Exmark Pro compared to Mike Walker's fix back in 47?
Yeah. It's exactly the same mechanism that he drew in the margin of a memo. It's exactly the same mechanism that I have drawn during deposition.
But the company still contends the old mechanism is safe, so now it sells both, side by side. We wanted to know what the man responsible for both designs would think about that, so we tracked him down.
Hello. This is Jerry.
We found Mike Walker, retired in North Carolina, the man who designed the Remington 700 and came up with a way to fix it, is 98 years old. In a moment, Mike Walker tells his story to us for the first time.
You realize, of course, you guys are going to get me in trouble with Remington.
Rich Barber's quest for the truth about the death of his son has taken him across the country and deep inside the Remington 700, including the firing mechanism, which both critics and internal company documents have warned can cause the gun to go off without pulling the trigger. The gun was designed in the 1940s by a young Remington engineer named Mike Walker.
If you had the chance to meet Mike Walker today, what would you tell him?
Step up and tell it like it is. Let the truth be known. Stop the carnage. Purge himself of this horrendous burden he's had to carry.
We found Mike Walker living in a retirement community in North Carolina.
This is all about me, huh?
Walker retired from Remington in 1975. Today, at 98 years old, he still builds guns in his workshop beneath his certificate of induction into the Remington Hall of Fame. He still shoots a couple of times a month at the local gun club, where he has an honorary membership. He has never spoken publicly about alleged problems with the Remington 700 until now.
Perfect trigger from a standpoint of the feel of it. The fact that they put a few bad guns together, after I left, that is.
Yeah. What's your understanding of what was happening with the guns?
Oh, the safety did not retract the firing pin, so it was not a safety anymore.
Yeah. Mike Walker is well aware of the complaints surrounding the 700. In fact, his own memos obtained by CNBC show he repeatedly raised concerns about the gun he designed. As early as 1946, with the gun still in the testing stage, Walker writes about a theoretical unsafe condition involving the safety.
Bad parts.
Yeah.
Parts that did not meet the drawing.
Yeah. And did you tell people about that back then? That it's very important that these be put together right?
While I was there, I had an inspection that stopped the rifles going out with that condition.
Yeah.
After I left, some dummies got the inspection that I had introduced taken away.
Today, Walker clings to the idea that the problem is in the manufacturing process, not the design. But in 1948, before the gun went on sale, he proposed a design alternative laid out in this memo, a safety that would lock the trigger in place, preventing it from falling out of alignment and allowing the gun to go off. You had another design when you originally were doing the original
I had a design that locked the trigger, yes.
But you don't know why they didn't use that in the first place.
Yes, it had something to do with cost.
It had almost everything to do with cost, according to this memo, which says that while Walker's change is the best design, its disadvantages lay in the high expenditure required to make the conversion. The cost, 5.5 cents a gun. What it sounds like you're saying here is that the company could have produced a safer rifle, but because of cost, they went with a different design. Is that correct?
That's probably right.
Mike Walker would repeatedly argue for a change, even after his retirement. At one point, he even suggests the company change the name of the safety rather than give users a false sense of security. In this 1978 memo, he suggests calling it something like an interrupter snubber, a disconnector, or a switch arrestor. In 1982, 7 years after leaving the company, he pleads in this memo, please don't bring out a new bolt action without a foolproof safety. But the company still refuses to make a change. You spent a long time with Remington. Was this a company that you think would put costs, would put profit ahead of safety and ahead of human lives?
No, I don't think so. I think it was stupidity.
Remington has never acknowledged problems with Mike Walker's trigger mechanism. The company has insisted that every inadvertent discharge, and the complaints run into the thousands, has been the result of user error. And a source close to Remington insists every rifle is inspected before it leaves the factory. And what does Mike Walker think about the injuries and deaths that have been associated with the product he designed, including the tragedy of the Barber family?
Poor handling of rifles, that's all.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that rifle was faulty or not.
Do you feel like that has any relation to your design or the manufacturer, or is that something that just happened?
It's hard to tell. She said she didn't have her finger on the trigger.
Yeah.
Maybe that's so, and maybe it isn't.
Because it's such an easy pull? Is that what you mean?
Right.
Yeah. Remington's own analysis in 1979 found 1% of the rifles could be tricked into firing. 1% of the 2 million guns sold at the time of the memo is 20,000. Today, with 5 million sold, that would be 50,000. Mike Walker says he doesn't know how many guns are affected, but he believes Remington needs to find out and let its customers know.
If I was there, I would advertise the fact that the rifles need repair and if the safety didn't work right.
But rather than recall the rifles, Remington continues to deny there's a problem. The company even urged Mike Walker not to talk with us, but he invited us into his home anyway, no matter the consequences.
You realize, of course, you guys are going to get me in trouble with Remington.
It's what another former employee calls the Remington way.
What is the Remington way?
You just don't tell nobody nothing.
Coming up, the secret of the 700, how Remington kept it under wraps for so long.
To whom it may concern.
They are voices from across the country.
And I remember saying, I didn't touch this trigger.
And it went off spontaneously without touching the trigger.
First-person accounts of jarring, frightening accidents.
It misfired.
As soon as I let it go, the gun went off.
Told directly to Remington.
When I pushed the safety off, the gun fired.
In the 6 decades since Remington introduced its 700 series of rifles, the company has received thousands of customer complaints like these about the guns going off unintentionally. But rarely did one customer know about the others. Roger James says that was by design.
I had to come home every night and think about it. I said to myself, once I leave this company, I'd like for some lawyers to get in touch with me, and I'd like to get some of this stuff out in the nation to the customers.
Roger James spent 25 years at Remington. He retired in 1993, still collects a Remington pension, and remains close to former colleagues still at the company. He has been paid to testify in 2 lawsuits against his former employer. James worked his way up from the assembly line to become a claims analyst, one of the people on the receiving end of the customer complaints.
What were the types of things that you heard about?
The guns would go off and they didn't pull the trigger, you know, the safety was on, the gun still went off.
What were you supposed to tell the customer?
To tell them that the gun didn't just go off. I mean, there's something there that made the gun go off.
The procedure, James says, was to pass the complaints on to a colleague whose job was to respond to the customer.
He just had to make up something.
Remington even developed a form letter saying the problems, which the company has known about since the 1940s, are not representative of Remington quality nor characteristic of the Model 700 rifle.
If you had told customers that you were dealing with, if you had told them that there were these problems, what would have happened?
I would have never had a job there.
How do you know that?
I know the Remington way.
And what is the Remington way?
You just don't tell nobody nothing.
Roger James retired in 1993, but what he calls the Remington way is still actively employed, according to Texas attorney Jeffrey Hightower. He has tried multiple lawsuits against the company and says that to this day, Remington trains its customer service representatives to choose their words carefully.
They're getting responses, sometimes from their legal department, about how to address with proper wording, what do you say to this, what do you say to that?
Hightower questioned Remington Representative Laura Watson in a deposition in January 2010.
It was pretty well known, was it not, within Remington that the Model 700 had had at least some history of concern on the part of the consumers, right?
Yes.
It's fair to say that as of today, right now, Remington knows that its Model 700s will in fact fire absent a trigger pull under certain conditions.
Under certain conditions, yes, I guess that would be fair to say.
But chances are you wouldn't learn that from a Remington dealer. We took hidden cameras to retailers in 8 states. These salespeople are on the front lines of Remington's marketing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're all safe.
If they are aware of problems with the Remington 700s, they aren't saying so.
Well, I haven't heard anything about it.
At Yellowstone Gateway Sports near Bozeman, Montana, owner Ted Kraus is standing by his Remingtons.
Same gun is built with a stainless steel barrel.
Have they ever communicated anything to you about any issues with inadvertent discharge of the 700s?
No.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Have you ever? And what does that tell you? That tells you there's not a problem?
That's what that tells me, is that there is not a constant problem with the Model 700.
But at one chain, they may be in a position to know better. Cabela's, with 30 stores in the U.S. and Canada, is one of the largest sporting goods retailers in the world. Cabela's CEO is Tommy Milner, who joined the company in 2009 after 10 years as CEO of Remington. 10 years that included thousands of complaints and the death in 2000 of Gus Barber. Milner even met with Rich Barber after the accident. Through a spokesman, Tommy Milner declined to talk with us about the fact that Cabela's continues to sell rifles with the Walker trigger, like this Remington 770, which we bought brand new at a Cabela's in Connecticut.
Thanks a lot.
So how is a gun buyer to know the truth? While some magazines like Field and Stream have reported on the popularity of the 700, Consumer Reports stopped evaluating guns decades ago. But in 1968, it evaluated the 700.
Consumer Reports does an evaluation, and lo and behold, the gun goes off.
Yes, sir. The rifle experienced a firearm safety release malfunction.
The gun went off not just once, but repeatedly, the publication noted, warning that an unwary buyer might have caused a serious accident.
And Remington's response at that time is not to recall the guns.
No, they're worried about their company being embarrassed and hurting the bottom line.
Noting management's extreme displeasure over the Consumer Reports article and calling it embarrassing, Remington launched a new effort to redesign the rifle, a program the company would keep secret for years until the Texas Supreme Court ordered Remington to disclose it. Attorney Robert Chaffin discovered the program almost by accident on a single piece of paper in a room full of documents Remington had turned over in a lawsuit.
And what did that document say?
It was called NBAR, New Bolt Action Rifle Program. The bottom line on that document showed that if they changed the manufacturing process, they could add a safety element to the gun which would prevent most all of these accidents.
But instead of changing its guns, Remington changed its message to the public.
Unloaded, and always follow the 10 commandments of gun safety whenever you're handling a firearm.
Remington paid the giant public relations firm Hill & Knowlton to craft a new version of the 10 Commandments of firearm safety, an essential part of Remington's message to this day. The commandments shipped with every new rifle include always keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction, firearms should be unloaded when not actually in use, and don't rely on your gun's safety. But gun expert Jack Belk, who's been hired to testify in several lawsuits against Remington, says the commandments don't address the real issue with the 700 series.
What is a safe direction when you don't know when the gun's going to fire? Falling bullets kill people, ricocheting bullets kill people, and of course bullets going horizontal. They certainly kill people.
Remington, which declined our request for an interview, insists in its written statement to us that if proper firearm safety rules are followed, no accidental injuries would ever occur. But no one can force gun owners to obey the rules, and it turns out no one has been able to force any gun maker to recall a defective product. Coming up, rights, responsibilities, and the most popular hunting rifle in the world in the conclusion of Remington Under Fire. The Remington 700 series is the most popular bolt-action rifle in the world, and for more than 60 years, Remington has maintained the gun is safe. But we found that from the very beginning, the company looked at ways to fix it, even contemplating a nationwide recall. But time and again, Remington decided against a recall. And it turns out that decision is Remington's, and Remington's alone. For most products, cars, toys, food, even BB guns, the government can order a recall without a single reported incident, like this crossbow recalled in 2010 after regulators found it could fire without pulling the trigger when the safety is switched off. But guns hold a special place in American life and American law, says attorney Jeffrey Hightower.
Nobody can force them to make a recall. It's really up to them, right?
Remington polices itself. The gun industry polices itself.
Federal law specifically bars the government from setting safety standards for guns because of the Second Amendment. Rich Barber says that's as it should be. He's a strong supporter of gun rights, an avid shooter. He even sometimes shoots Remingtons.
It is our responsibility as pro-gun individuals to regulate an issue of this nature. I am fearful that if the government got involved in this, that they would put such stringent standards on firearms, they'd be so safe they wouldn't work.
But now some are trying to force Remington's hand. The company is battling 2 proposed class action suits demanding a nationwide recall. Attorney Robert Chaffin, who is not involved in the latest suits, says that is easier said than done. He says fixing the 700, once estimated by Remington to cost 5.5 cents a gun, has become far more expensive 60 years and 5 million guns later. The latest estimate, he says, is $75 to $100 per gun.
So you're talking about a recall campaign that could have cost up to $300 million if it was run to its fullest, which was actually more than the entire net worth of the company.
Since 2007, Remington has been owned by the giant investment firm Cerberus, which had quietly begun buying gun companies the year before. In October of 2009, Cerberus announced plans to sell stock in a new company called Freedom Group, a collection of gun makers built around Remington. Just like at Remington and DuPont, Cerberus officials declined to be interviewed. The company said it couldn't talk to us about the Remington 700, not this close to the public stock offering.
I don't think anybody wants to go on national TV and lie. I could say whatever I want, but those documents clearly speak for themselves, and they speak volumes about what the company knew, when they knew it, what they did, and what they did not do, and what they continue to do today. When I come out here, on the way I think about Gus.
It has been 10 years since the death of his son. Rich Barber occasionally wishes life could be back the way it was, but he knows that can never be.
I don't see the world like I used to as a glorious place.
He says he has lost faith in the legal system and in corporate America, so sometimes he comes out here.
You look at evil all the time, and what does that do? I mean, do you go to a place to shut it off? Or do you have a place to go to shut it off? I do. That's my place, because when I'm on my rifle, I don't feel anything.
But even out here, under the big sky of Montana, Rich Barber is a father without his son.
A lot of people have said Gus is in a better place, and maybe that's true, but Gus's place was at my side. That's what I believe.
Hey YouTube fans, I'm Landon Downey from CNBC. Thanks so much for checking out our channel. Here you'll find videos packed with all the info that you need to be smarter about your finances. Be sure and subscribe by clicking right here, and click on all the videos around me to see CNBC's original series Young Money, Tech Bet, Kramer's Mad Money, and all the latest from CNBC.